I think it's time to draw a line on Ukraine. I have been, as far as regarding it as an American, I'll put it this way, I've been thoroughly disinterested in the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia that's been ongoing since the CIA-backed coup in 2014. I find it interesting as a spectator, but as an American, I see, I see no interest there. It doesn't affect me one way or the other. Whoever comes out on top, doesn't matter to me. I mean, I care about individual people who die in the conflict and things like that. That makes me sad. But no matter who comes out on top, it's not going to affect me. It never would. Whether or not Putin annexed Crimea or not has no bearing on my everyday life. But now I think we're getting to the point to where the Ukrainians are becoming a serious liability for me personally as an American, because Ukraine, over the past few months, has been really pushing itself towards NATO more aggressively than ever, in trying to ingratiate itself amongst the NATO powers and beg for not a seat at the table, but some sort of protectorate status. They want their foreign policy to be completely ceded to NATO, and they want to be brought under the NATO umbrella. And that's one thing. I can understand, hey, if you're a smaller, poorer country, it would be beneficial to you to outsource your defense spending to the United States. The U.S. spends so much more than every other country, than most other countries combined. And so, what are they going to do with all that defense spending? You might as well get to benefit from some of that. Somebody's going to get it anyway, right? So why not you? It makes sense. I understand it. Even though I don't like it as an American, I understand why other countries would want to have the U.S. military defend them. But with that said, it seems to me that the Ukrainians are not just interested in merely using any sort of affiliation with NATO as insurance against them being invaded by somebody else. It seems like Ukraine is trying to stand behind the big tough guy that is NATO and the United States, and then, hurl insults and taunts over at the Russian bear in hopes that they can get Mr. Putin to come over and engage in a fight with Mr. NATO. Ukraine is essentially a toady without much tact. And because of that, I fear they're becoming a liability. It's no longer sufficient to be merely not pro-fighting Ukraine's wars. You must be actively anti-Ukrainian at this point, as far as I'm concerned. Because the Ukrainians seem bound and determined to suck the United States and the other NATO countries, but of course mainly the United States, into some stupid conflict in the Black Sea, which is completely meaningless to Americans. Remember, the Black Sea is a dead end. It's not like the Mediterranean Sea, to where, on one end it goes into the Atlantic, and on the other end it goes, through the Suez Canal and eventually into the Indian Ocean. I guess, what is that it hits first? The Red Sea or something, that between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. But anyway, eventually you get into the Indian Ocean. So the Mediterranean Sea is somewhat important. I don't think that it's the job of the Americans to patrol the Mediterranean Sea, but at least you can make an argument as to why it would have some strategic interest, theoretically, to America as an imperial power, even though I disagree with America being an imperial power. The Black Sea, however, is completely meaningless. The Black Sea doesn't go anywhere. Where does it go? It goes to Georgia, Russia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. Oh, and Turkey. Well, Turkey has access to the Mediterranean, so there's not much there's not much justification if you're concerned about Turkey. But then again, why would the U.S. be concerned about Turkey? Even in NATO circles, Turkey is not considered to be much of an ally of the United States these days. And so, what is NATO doing? Just doing circles, playing war games in the Black Sea? Why would, what is all this talk about about even hinting at the possibility of some kind of war in the Black Sea, when that war would inevitably be fought between nuclear powers? I don't know how many times I have to hammer on this point, but every time, but I will mention at least once in a video on this topic. Nuclear countries cannot go to war with each other. It's not that they should not, it's not that they may not, it's that they cannot. Because if nuclear powers do go to war with each other, and it's a serious war, if it's a war over something that matters, eventually it would lead to an escalation to the use of nuclear force, which would lead to the eradication of a substantial portion of the human population. And so because of that, the possibility of nuclear war needs to be taken off the table in as many cases as possible. And this Black Sea case is certainly one of them. There's not much to be gained by ever having some kind of war in the Black Sea. I don't see really any advantage in threatening a war in the Black Sea. Hell, even the Mediterranean, that's important for European shipping routes. It doesn't matter so much for American shipping routes. We can still get things from Shanghai to LA. Who cares if they can move goods from Shanghai to Rotterdam? But hell, we're not even talking about that. We're talking about the Black Sea. We're not talking about the Mediterranean Sea. The only major country that should have any real concern or interest in the Black Sea would be Russia, because, as I said before, that's where their warm water port is for their navy. So Russia, if they want to have a navy that can operate 365 days a year, the Black Sea is important to them. But any of these NATO countries, the Ukrainian navy, well, I'm sure there's plenty of room left in the Black Sea for both the Russian and the Ukrainian navy. I can't imagine the Ukrainian navy being too big. And then what else? Bulgaria, Romania, and Georgia. I don't think their navies are that big. Hell, they don't need a navy. They're in NATO. Well, Georgia isn't, but Romania and Bulgaria, they're in NATO. They don't need a navy. They have the United States. I mean, heck, what are they worried about? Are they worried about the Russians conquering Georgia and reintegrating them into the Soviet Union, and then conquering Bulgaria and Romania and turning them into puppet states again? Even if they did, why should I care? They were like that for most of the 20th century. I'm not saying that I would want that to happen. I would feel bad for the people who would have to live under that, even though it's a ridiculous scenario that would never happen. Still theoretically, I would feel bad for those people, but it doesn't affect me. And so therefore, if the people around in that region, such as the Ukrainian foreign minister, are going to be so hawkish and talk about this possibility so openly, I think that it is best to disassociate from anyone who is even hinting at this sort of idea, because it just will never be worth the risk, even if he's bluffing. This is not something to bluff about, especially when it doesn't matter. And so the U.S. should just go to the Ukrainians and cut them off completely and say, you know what, no, this is not the way to get our attention. This is not the way to earn our affection or protection. You need to settle down. You need to make nice with Mr. Putin. He's your neighbor. You might not like your neighbor, but that's not our fault. That's not our job to deal with. You need to solve some of your own problems if you want to be an independent country. And never have the gall or the arrogance to think that the United States of America is going to fight a nuclear war on your behalf and end the human race over Ukraine. So, I guess I'll end it off there for today.